This is our truth. For 4 years, our psyches have been under attack. Rebecca Solnit wrote just this week about the assault on our psyches these last 4 years and how we are only just now returning to a dazed trauma response, like a Looney Tunes character with little birdies and stars running around the circumference of our heads as we shake off our huge misstep off the cliff. Solnit references David J. Morris in his book, The Evil Hours, a biography of post-traumatic stress disorder, calling trauma a disease of time. With PTSD, the past refuses to become the past or stay there, and the traumatic event forces itself back like a zombie rising from the dead into the present, or the source of trauma never truly receded to become the past at all. When the Biden inauguration happened, I was surprised to find that I was neither uplifted nor relieved, but liberated, freed to feel how hideous the whole thing had been, how damaged I felt. And I heard from many others who had the same experience. Solnit writes, living under the last administration was like living in the aftermath of an earthquake, when the aftershocks can come at any time, or living with an unstable abuser. And in fact, it was living with an unstable abuser who was on one hand not in the house with us, and on the other hand was our president and the most powerful person on earth. It kept you on edge. It kept you thinking about him, speaking of the psychic real estate he occupied, and thinking about that also kept you from thinking about other things, about deeper meanings and longer time frames. For a lot of us, this meant we entered a state I called informational hypervigilance, convinced that I needed to read the news constantly, scan Twitter for the very latest, check in after any absence to see what had happened while I was out buying groceries. I read news obsessively, which meant that I didn't read books nearly enough, and the very mindset of a reader was undermined by this jumpy, twitchy news surveillance. I heard from others that they too felt they had forgotten how to read, in the sense of how to pay attention to long, complex narratives. And then the barrage, the confusion. Did laws matter? Did the Constitution? If they didn't matter now, would they ever matter again? One got tired of outrage, and then more outrages came. This week was a hungry cannibal that devoured last week, as Rebecca Solnit put it. And now it's been 100 days since we have emerged from the assault on our psyches. We have entered a new phase of the pandemic where people have begun reporting feelings of prolonged exhaustion and malaise. This has been a difficult year beyond our imaginations, for most of us dotted with periods of depression, exhaustion, anxiety, insomnia, and overwhelm. And while we love to always be the helpers, to present ourselves in our moments of strength and having it all together, to be the rock and the life raft. But what about when you are in the depth of your pain? What then? What if you are the needy one? I notice many of us, tend to burrow down in our rabbit holes, preferring to deal with our mental struggles in private. We fear becoming a burden to others. We were taught not to show our weaknesses. We were taught the importance of being stoic and presenting our best side. But what if, as Adrienne Marie Brown asks, we consider ourselves scholars of belonging? 1 year ago, in late April 2020, We developed a brand new program at UUCA called Neighborhood Circles, with the idea to connect our regionally vast congregation according to neighborhoods. We noticed groups of congregants live in Tucker, while another group lives on the west side, or another in Decatur or Doraville. And in our rush to provide connection immediately, I admit I did not cast the line into the lake with precision and purpose. So let me correct this. 1 year later, the true mission of Neighborhood Circles is not to socialize nor build community, though that may happen. No, the mission of Neighborhood Circles is for you to develop the skill of asking for help. That's it. Can you be powerfully vulnerable, courageously wholehearted? Can you be a scholar of belonging with me? What comes to mind when you hear that word, powerful? Maybe someone who's independent, strong, silent, free of emotional baggage. I blame all these Marvel superheroes capturing our imagination these last 2 decades. So exceptional in their strength and beauty, some of them are gods, not mere mortals. And what do you think when you hear the word vulnerable? What comes to mind? Perhaps weak or shameful, small, maybe female or child. Well, I say vulnerability is power. Power to connect, power to ask for what you need, power to live wholeheartedly, and power to be resilient in the face of shame. In his fantastic book, Fear, Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh specifically references a certain female bodhisattva. He tells the story of Kuan Yin. She is the bodhisattva of compassion. Kuan Yin began meditating as a young girl, angering her father who wished her to drop this devotion and marry her off so he could receive her dowry. Throughout her life, she practiced ultimate compassion meditation, but she also worked with the neediest people in her community. She passed every spiritual test and was ultimately and eventually welcomed into nirvana. She was on the precipice of passing into a place of eternal light and peace and becoming one with the universe's deepest power, just like the Buddha. But then, summoning all the courage she had, she resisted. "I do not wish it," she said to the universal light. "People here on earth are still unhappy. Everywhere I see misery and suffering. People starve, people fight each other in wars. Everyone is holy, but they don't know it." "I wish," she said into the universal light, "I wish to stay here on earth until every living thing knows it is holy." And with that, a divine force swept over her in a wave of love. I love this story of Kuan Yin because instead of ascending to enlightenment, she chose earthly suffering along with those she was helping. Rather than hover above us all, she knew her power lay in the connection she had cultivated with humanity, to living wholeheartedly amongst the people. You know, the history of the word courage, it has to do with wholeheartedness. Courage, derived from the Latin word cor, meaning heart. The original meaning of that word was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. As a research social psychologist, Dr. Brené Brown has interviewed thousands of people on the subject of shame, vulnerability, and courage. Through her research, she has come to some conclusions about people who practice what she calls shame resilience. She concluded, we humans are neurobiologically hardwired for connection. Our ability to connect is a survival mechanism for our brains and our bodies to function. This is why 1 year ago, we knew we had to create neighborhood circles. We had to call each other. We had to check in relentlessly when quarantine began and not leave anyone out. In Brené Brown's research, she has come to a conclusion about the role of shame in society. Shame is the fear of disconnection, that there is something about me that if other people know it or they see it, I won't be worthy of connection. I won't be worthy of belonging. But here's the thing about shame, says Dr. Brown. The less you talk about it, the stronger it gets. In her research, she found what underpinned shame is an excruciating fear of vulnerability. So one way to cultivate shame resilience as scholars of belonging that we are is to normalize asking for help. In order for connection to happen, we have to be able to be seen in our wholeness, including in our time of need. The one thing that keeps us from connection is the fear that we are not worthy of connection. Brené Brown has an expression for living with this level, this courageous level of vulnerability. She calls it wholehearted living. She writes, shame is the birthplace of perfectionism. So those who live wholeheartedly practice the courage to be imperfect. They cultivate compassion to be kind to themselves first and then others. They fully embrace vulnerability because what makes us vulnerable makes us beautiful. Vulnerability is uncomfortable. It's not just enjoyable, but it is necessary. This is how we become scholars of belonging, to cultivate within ourselves the courage to reach out. Now, it is scary, it is exhausting to be that vulnerable. So I'm not suggesting you get out there and share all your shame. I'm simply inviting you into joining a neighborhood circle or find a way to develop that skill, to exercise that skill of asking for help when you need it. Practicing courage, compassion, and connection, well, that's how we cultivate shame resilience. The feminist theologian Mary Daly writes, courage is a habit, a virtue. You get it by courageous acts. It's like you learn to swim by swimming. You learn courage by couraging. For all of us, this has been a year of couraging. I've been reminded this year, lately, of my days as a chaplain at Beth Israel Medical Center in New York City. And I remember how at the beginning of my chaplaincy, how afraid I was to be with people in their moments of suffering. I feared standing inside their suffering and truly seeing their pain. Often, it is terrifying to go towards suffering. Many people want to run from it, to go towards people they believe are successful, happy, and have it all together. I am guilty of this too. But instead, I cut through the fear, and probably only because it was required of me. In my chaplaincy program, I cut through that fear and invited patients to articulate their pain even further, beyond my comfort and often beyond theirs. I was afraid they would feel worse I would feel bad. We would all be miserable without end. This is not an uncommon fear. But guess what? It had the opposite effect. It turns out when someone speaks that thing they are most afraid to speak, and someone else offers witness, their pain lessens. Tears may be shed, tears that express toxins, both chemical and spiritual. While I was chaplaining, one patient I spoke to felt such relief after unburdening herself as she closed her eyes, breathing in and out until I realized she'd fallen asleep. This process of accessing the power of vulnerability, well, it doesn't work if you are judgmental or if you make assumptions or if you try to solve someone's life. It only works if you cultivate a spirit of curiosity. Wouldn't it be lovely? Wouldn't it be something if Unitarian Universalists were known the world over, not for our fierce individualism, no, not for our strongly asserted opinions, but for our wholehearted curiosity, our courageous vulnerability? What if more world leaders believed in the power of vulnerability? What if, instead of hovering above it all in the shallows, we harnessed the power of Kuan Yin and chose to be here on earth, struggling away, reaching out for help when we need it, being scholars of belonging together? We are each carrying some kind of trauma. We are struggling with the weight of all we have survived. We are not defined by our mental struggles, but they are a part of our story. So let us be scholars of belonging. Let us be courageous in our reaching out, in our wholehearted living. This is how we will not only remake ourselves, but the world. May it be so. Amen.